cannon redoubts, which this may be one.
Yes, you may well be right, because Sir William Brereton with his army were unable to take the castle. They might have had very strong defences using cannon. Up here.
So you need some cannonballs out of the ditch.
Cannonballs have been found in the wood.
They have? Well,
yes,
there you are.
Well, Phil, let's go and have a look at perhaps I think, one of the most amazing things that we've found yet. This Civil War defence system, I think, has outstanded us, yes.
The search for the Civil War defences is a cautionary tale for those who think that all archaeologists do is simply uncover the past layer by layer.
The sophistication of this defence system. I think the whole thing must have been revetted in timber. It wouldn't have stood one winter the way it is.
There's always the danger that the wish can be father to the thought.
Posts to revet the material behind.
And that proved to be the case at Stafford.
We expected, I think, to find a large ditch, a deep ditch, dug down into the natural hill below us. Well, quite frankly, we haven't found that at all. And what I now think is that in the 1642-43, the Cavaliers, who would have been under great pressure up here, decided simply to cut back an old medieval terrace, cutting a straight edge at the back there and lining it with timber to prop it up, if you like. The answer to all of this lies below us still. We must get right down to the very bottom, and until we've done that, I'm afraid we cannot decide one way or the other what the Civil War defences look like. It's a bit like a cancer. We're trying to remove the 19th century cancer to get down to the earlier levels, which perhaps will be uncontaminated, and at present this is becoming more and more difficult. It was an archaeological problem, purely and simply, in that we excavated the site stratigraphically, layer by layer down, and the top layers had 17th century material alone in them, and we went down through those to levels which contained 19th century pottery. And quite simply, I mean, it was a 19th century sand pit, I feel at present, but that 17th century material had been thrown into it. So we had this what we in the trade would call inverse stratigraphy, but it was quite confusing, but I think we've cleared that up now.
4 years, no Civil War defences, just a massive Victorian sandpit. This time, the hunch didn't pay off. Elsewhere, better luck. A range of medieval industrial buildings began to appear at the northern end of the excavation. This was a workshop area dating back to the time when the castle would have provided jobs for hundreds of local people.
Getting on the bottom now, Dave.
So, century by century, the diggers went through the various phases of occupation on the hill until they reached the surface of the 11th century hillside, the Saxon field which was dug up by conscript labour to make a Norman stronghold. Here too was the castle moat, the last line of defence behind which the garrison of the keep could retire. This was a major discovery. Now Hill and Barker had the evidence they sought to complete their picture of the great Norman timber and earth defensive system. After excavation, the finds from the castle were taken to the archaeologist's laboratory. And where more appropriate for those whose business is examining yesterday's rubbish than a corner office in Stafford's highways depot, next door to where today's rubbish is collected. Here are stored the thousands of finds which came from the castle and from its little township. They've been cleaned and then recorded and catalogued so that future generations can tie them to the place where they were originally found. And here's a wealth of detail about the life of ordinary people here in the Middle Ages. Women's brooches and buckles, domestic pottery, glazed pottery imported from Stafford, and even bits of fancy French pots that have come from the continent. And military gear too, horseshoes, blades, arrowheads, buckles, stirrups. And finally, those little touches of intimate detail that reveal so much about the life of the past. The games that they played, for instance, draughts and chess, and a dice which was perhaps rolled by a bunch of men-at-arms up on that castle on the eve of the Black Death. But 20th century Stafford, a mile to the east, hasn't always paid so much respect to its past. Stafford was an important Saxon centre before the Norman conquest. But though there are still streets with character, Stafford has lost most of its historical buildings without much fuss. From the start of the project, Hill and Barker were well aware they had to persuade public opinion that the dig was worthwhile if they were to stand a chance of securing the money and support they needed.
Right, now then, shall we walk up the roadway right through the middle of the Outer Bailey? This is the gateway to the Outer Bailey.
Education, presenting the castle as living history, was one approach.
Any of the troops dropped out yet? No.
The castle and its earthworks became a regular feature on the syllabus for Stafford's schools.
If you were carrying some sort of armour and a big hefty sword and somebody was throwing missiles at you, it wouldn't be as easy, would it?
Right from the start, the council set out to involve as many local people as possible.
Most of the public feel that the castle's a folly, and I feel by actually walking around the earthworks that they'll get a better idea of what this castle is, which is an early timber castle. For the first 250 years of its life, it's a timber castle and nothing else, no stonework. And I feel that if we had a collecting point on the main roadway, we might, through signposting on trees, ask the public to walk around various parts of the site.
Paying for the upkeep of a castle and for the ambitious plans of archaeologists was no small matter for a borough council. Stafford raised the £5,000 it needed for its castle trail through the local lottery. A year later, enough Stafford citizens had gambled and lost to enable another little opening ceremony to take place.
It's now my pleasure to open this trail and to walk round, and I hope many thousands of people will follow me in the future.
Mayor Dale, watched as usual by Councillor Dean, performed the honours. In the 3 weeks after the trail opened, 1,000 people signed the castle visitors book. But equally encouraging for the council, the vandalism, which had been an epidemic in the mid-70s, virtually disappeared.
What do you think of the castle? Very interesting.
Another reason for the improvement in the town's relationship with the castle was that all the diggers were locals. Some were volunteers like Carey Wiggins and Margaret Surridge, who worked at weekends, days off and evenings in return for expenses only. Stafford Castle once again became a sizable job creation scheme, just as it would have been in the 14th century. As the national unemployment figures began to rise towards and over the 3 million mark, dozens of local people found jobs here. For a while, the dig was one of the area's largest employers of young people. For some, what started as a hobby became work experience and ended as a career, like Nick Thomas.
Well, I started working here in 1979 when I was still a student. I was doing the very basic work at that time. The shoveling and a bit of troweling. Now I developed a technique. I returned again in 1980, perhaps became a little better at the job, and after leaving school in 81, I managed to get a post here as a yop. That was a 6-month scheme. I finished that scheme, again a little more knowledge, a little more experience, and I decided to do a bit more of the research type work, hoping perhaps to get a more permanent job in the end. Having spent a year unemployed doing research and voluntary work here, I then returned in 1982 under the MSc scheme, which was a full year scheme. Having finished that, I rather felt I'd be unemployed for a long time, but fortunately this year Charles has decided to employ me both to do research work into the finds and to actually supervise on the site. So now, after doing 6 seasons here, I'm actually assistant supervisor.
Altogether, over 2,000 local people have been involved in the dig. Archaeology is often seen as something purely academic. For Stafford, it became part of the town's everyday life. For Hill and Barker, it meant learning a new skill, public archaeology.
There will be an underlying, continuous academic archaeological investigation, but we're now going to go popular, as it were, to some extent, in the hope that this will not only bring in more money, but will increase the amount of public support that there is.
Well, I've in mind something on the American lines, an open-air museum of medieval archaeology, in which the castle and the medieval village earthworks would be a focal point for many activities. The earthworks in themselves would be part and parcel of the museum. I think we should have events up here, the archaeology ongoing. There are many activities that we can do on site to draw the public in.
Prime your piece. Fix your coal. Prepare to fire. Give fire.
The sealed knot, in the persons of Colonel Baggett's regiment of foot, family membership 8 pounds, were early visitors. Purists have criticised the growth of what's been called the heritage industry, but large numbers of people turn out every weekend to take part in and watch events like these. In May 1988, 7,000 visitors came to watch another sealed knot muster at Stafford.
Here you are, wench, before you die of thirst. Just try a sample of that and see whether that burns the back of the throat.
The trees which once surrounded the castle have now been cleared to give a view of the town. Now the earthworks and ramparts previously hidden under thick woodland are clearly visible. And in a remote area of the Outer Bailey, another experiment in bringing the past to life is taking shape. John Hales.
We've been trying to create a medieval herb garden, which you can see, using the natural resources of the local woodland, such as elm trees, beech trees that have been diseased, and subsequently they would have affected the rest of the trees. So we thought, well, we'll cut those down and use those for the wattling, make the beds. Each one we made as an individual herb bed for a different part of the body, etc., the same as they would have had in those particular days.
The garden was created by the local supporters club. The Friends of Stafford Castle now regularly welcome parties of visitors, including on this occasion a coachload from France.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Sorry, I don't speak French well enough.
No, but I'll try to speak English. I'm delighted to meet you. That's wonderful.
Visitors from Stafford's twin borough, Tosney in Normandy, where the very first Norman Baron of Stafford had his family home. 900 years ago, Saxon and Norman didn't exchange too many social niceties. Now the problem's just communication.
Je suis le président de la Société des Amis du Château de Stafford. Et c'est beau genre médiéval, en vérité, c'est M. Holland, grand personnage dans la ville. Il est le président du comité de liaison entre Stafford et l'Europe. Et ce n'est pas nécessaire à présenter M. Hill. Il est l'archéologue à Stafford, responsable pour tous les fouilles, tout ça.
Already, before the castle was reopened to the public in July 1988, it's estimated 10,000 visitors come here each year. Not bad for a Victorian folly.
Stafford has been immensely supportive of this project, both in money and in moral support, especially as at the beginning we had to prove to them that they had a major archaeological monument. And what they have now got is a monument of national importance, of immense size and very great potential.
Well, it's demonstrated first that this site, this Stafford Castle, is a historically important place. Secondly, that the people of this town and area are interested in their castle. And thirdly, and I think probably most important, how a little bit, well, not perhaps a little bit, but a reasonable amount of public money can be used as a pump primer to assemble the endeavours of all sorts of other people and bodies to complete a very major project.
10 years on, there's still a lifetime's archaeology at Stafford.
What went on in this area?
And why it's so big.
Why it's so big,
And
yes.
in fact, you suggested in the past that